What is a science fact that not many people know that will change the way they look at life? Story 1. This one creeps people out because it blurs a line we're very protective of. The theory is that elephants don't just mourn their dead in a vague animal way, they understand death well enough to perform something like burial. They cover bodies with foliage, stay with them for long periods, revisit bones years later. That already freaks people out because it looks uncomfortably close to ritual instead of instinct. Where it turns conspiratorial is the idea that this behavior isn't limited to elephants. There are scattered stories and second-hand reports of elephants doing the same thing for humans who died near them, covering bodies, standing guard, refusing to leave. Not attacking, not panicking, just acknowledging, like they recognized the same boundary crossing. And of course, you never hear much about it because the implication is unsettling. If elephants can recognize death across species and respond with something resembling respect, then the human monopoly on grief, ritual, and awareness starts looking shaky. Story 2. This is one of those facts that starts normal and ends kind of unhinged in a fun way. Mosquitoes really are the deadliest animals in human history, second only to humans themselves, mostly because of malaria. Not half of all humans ever levels like some posts claim, but still something like 4 to 5% of everyone who's ever lived. That's an absurd body count for an insect. The wild part is the treatment. Quinine's been known since the 1700s and actually works, but it tastes awful, super bitter. So during British colonial times in India, malaria was wrecking troops and administrators, and they needed people to actually take the stuff. Solution? Mix it into tonic water, and then spike it with gin so people would drink it willingly. That's where gin and tonic comes from, a life-saving anti-malarial delivery system disguised as a cocktail. Yeah, modern research shows you'd need a lot of tonic water to get a real medical effect, so the idea that a casual G&T was protecting people is mostly wishful thinking. But the origin story still stands. One of humanity's deadliest diseases led to one of the most popular drinks on Earth. We didn't just survive malaria, we turned the treatment into a happy hour ritual. Story 3. This one sounds gross until you remember how math and history work. Humans haven't been around that long, and for most of that time we lived in small, local populations that mixed a lot more than people like to imagine. Once you go back far enough, family trees stop branching neatly and start braiding together. That's why genealogists joke that everyone's family tree eventually turns into a wreath. So yeah, on a big enough scale, basically everyone on Earth is at least like a 50th cousin to everyone else. That's not weird, that's just population genetics doing its thing. The planet only had a few million people for a very long time, and they moved, mingled, and reused ancestors constantly. The second part is what makes people uncomfortable. If you're dating or married to someone from the same country and same general ethnic background, the odds that you share a common ancestor within the last 10 generations are actually pretty decent. Not your siblings decent, more like you both descend from the same random farmer in the 1600s, decent, which is why the word interbreeding here is mostly doing shock value work. At that distance, it's biologically meaningless and socially irrelevant.
You share more DNA with a banana than with your 10th cousin.
Still, it's funny how people like to imagine humanity as billions of unrelated strangers, when we're really just one extremely extended, awkward family reunion. Story 4. Yeah, this one's actually true, and people still underestimate how weird it is. If you're not of recent African ancestry, you're carrying Neanderthal DNA. Not a lot, but enough to matter. Around 1.5 to 2% of your genome. That's not trivia, that's a receipt. It means when early modern humans left Africa, they didn't just replace Neanderthals, they intermixed with them, repeatedly. Long enough for the genes to stick. And those genes aren't just sitting there doing nothing. Some are tied to immune responses, skin, hair, pain sensitivity, even how you react to cold or certain diseases. Basically, a chunk of what helps people survive outside Africa came from another human species we like to pretend was totally separate from us. The funny part is how this messes with the clean story people want. Humans didn't march out of Africa as a single pure lineage. We hooked up with whoever was already there, absorbed useful traits, and moved on. Very on brand, honestly. Story 5. Babies are basically born in modular mode. At birth, they've got around 300 bones, but a lot of them aren't fully bone yet. They're cartilage with gaps between them. That's not a bug, it's a feature. It lets their bodies squish through the birth canal and gives them way more flexibility for rapid growth. As you get older, a bunch of those separate pieces slowly fuse together. The skull is the big example. Those soft spots aren't cracks, they're future seams. The same thing happens all over the body as cartilage hardens and sections merge. By adulthood, all that modular hardware gets locked into the standard 206 bone setup. Right? Babies don't lose bones, they just consolidate them, like merging files into folders. It's a good reminder that humans aren't born finished. We ship in pieces and spend the first couple decades assembling ourselves. Story 6. From the Wright brothers' first flight to the moon landing, if you average it out, humanity increased its flight ceiling by something like 10,000 feet a day. That's not poetic, that's unhinged. We went from a guy wobbling in a wooden plane to casually leaving the planet in less than a human lifetime. No species should be allowed that kind of tech acceleration. Then there's the Cleopatra one. Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landing than to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which means to ancient Romans, the pyramids were already ancient history, basically archaeological wonders the same way Rome is to us. The past is way deeper than we intuitively feel, and if you're in your 30s, here's the emotional damage. The Star Wars prequels are now as old today as the original trilogy was when you probably first watched it. The thing you remember as the new ones has quietly aged into nostalgia while you weren't looking. Story 7. This one sounds fake, but it's technically correct. We are currently living in an ice age, not a movie-style frozen wasteland, but a long-term climate state, where at least one of Earth's poles has permanent ice. As long as Antarctica, and usually Greenland, stay frozen year-round, we're in an ice age. By that definition, we've been in one for about 2.6 million years. What throws people off is that ice ages aren't just endless cold. They're made up of cycles, long cold glacial periods, and shorter warm interglacials. Right now, we're in a warm interglacial phase called the Holocene. Basically, the nice part of an ice age. The brief window where humans invented agriculture, cities, and all our problems. So when people say the next ice age, what they usually mean is the next glacial maximum, not the start of a whole new ice age. Those come and go even while the planet is technically still in one. It's a good reminder that Earth's climate operates on timescales way bigger than vibes or weather apps. We're not in a stable default state, or in a temporary warm break inside a very long, very cold chapter. Enjoy the intermission. Story 8. If you took all the DNA in a single human body and stretched it out end to end, you'd get something on the order of billions of kilometers. Each cell only has about 2 meters of DNA, which doesn't sound like much, until you remember you've got around 30 to 40 trillion cells. Suddenly you're dealing with distances that make astronomy uncomfortable. Depending on how you round the numbers, you can absolutely get figures like to the sun and back, dozens or even hundreds of times. The exact multiplier varies because cell counts vary and not every cell has a nucleus, but the core idea holds. An absurd amount of information packed into microscopic space. What really messes with your head isn't the distance, it's the compression. All that DNA is folded and refolded and managed so precisely that it fits inside nuclei you can't even see without a microscope. And it still gets accessed, copied, repaired, and read constantly without turning into spaghetti. Story 9. The idea came from early studies of wolves stuck together in captivity. Unrelated animals, cramped space, artificial stress. So of course dominance hierarchies formed and fights broke out. Researchers slapped the label alpha on the winners and everyone ran with it. In the wild, that's not how wolf packs work at all. A pack is usually just a family, parents and their offspring from a few different years. The so-called alphas are just the mom and dad. They don't dominate through constant aggression, they lead because they're the experienced adults. The rest aren't subordinates plotting coups, they're kids. What's funny is that once the myth caught on, it escaped science completely. It got baked into pop psychology, self-help nonsense, business culture, dating advice, masculinity podcasts, all based on a misunderstanding of stressed animals in cages. The original researcher later tried to correct it after studying wolves in the wild, but by then it didn't matter. The concept was too useful as a metaphor for human insecurity. Story 10. The idea, popularized by Neil deGrasse Tyson, is that if you compress the entire history of the universe into a single calendar year, the Big Bang happens at midnight on January 1st. Galaxies form months later. The sun and Earth don't show up until early September. Life appears, crawls around doing microbial stuff for ages. Dinosaurs were Christmas week. They go extinct on December 30th. All of recorded human history, agriculture, pyramids, Rome, the internet, you reading this, happens in the last few seconds before midnight on December 31st. Like not minutes, seconds. Blink and you miss it seconds, which really puts things in perspective when people act like humanity is the main character of the universe. We're not even in the after credits scene. We're the notification that pops up right before the year rolls over. Story 11. Coffee is acidic, baking soda is basic, and heat gives the reaction enough energy to actually do something useful. Toss a little baking soda into the bottom of your coffee pot, pour in boiling water, and slosh it around. Even if the pot looks clean, you'll watch brown coffee gunk you didn't know was there suddenly lift off like it was embarrassed to be seen. That residue builds up slowly, so you stop noticing it. But it absolutely messes with the taste. Coffee oils cling to glass and plastic, go stale, and turn every new pot into a remix of yesterday's brew. The baking soda basically neutralizes and loosens all that invisible funk. Rinse it really well afterwards so you don't get weird flavors, and then make a fresh pot. The difference is subtle but real. Cleaner, less bitter, less burnt memory of coffee past. Story 12. All life on Earth runs on the same basic code. DNA is DNA. When people say humans share about 50% of their DNA with bananas, it doesn't mean half your genes are banana genes. It means about half of the fundamental cellular instructions, how to grow cells, copy DNA, run basic chemistry, are shared because we all came from the same ancient biological toolkit. The closer the relationship, the more overlap you get. Humans and other primates are around 98% similar because we split off relatively recently on the evolutionary timeline. Same blueprint, slightly different edits. That's why the differences matter more than the similarities. They're doing a lot of work with very small changes. What really lands is the perspective shift. There's no clean hierarchy where humans sit outside nature. We're not separate from the system. We're just another organism, running a modified version of the same code everything else is using. Well liked by clients, same molecules, same chemistry, same planet, same rock hurtling through space. Story 13. A big enough solar flare, specifically one that triggers a massive geomagnetic storm, could absolutely wreck large parts of the global power grid, not by frying your phone instantly, but by inducing huge electrical currents in long conductors like power lines and transformers. Those transformers are the scary part. They're expensive, custom built, take months or years to replace, and there aren't warehouses full of spares. We've had near misses. The famous 1859 Carrington event made telegraph wires spark and catch fire. If something that strong hit today, with modern infrastructure, it wouldn't be lights out for an afternoon. It'd be rolling blackouts, damaged grids, satellites failing, GPS glitches, internet weirdness, and long recovery times in the hardest hit regions. The uncomfortable part is that this isn't a question of if, just when. The sun does this stuff periodically. We're basically relying on probability and early warning systems to save us, and those only give hours, not days. Story 14. Basically, almost all major domesticated livestock came out of Eurasia. Cows, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, nearly the entire animal toolkit humans use to build civilization. Out of the handful of livestock species that ever really mattered at scale, something like 15 out of 16 originated there. Everywhere else mostly got llamas. Useful, but not exactly empire engines. And those animals weren't just food. They were transportation, labor, fertilizer, wealth storage, military tech, and religious symbols. They pulled plows, enabled surplus, freed up time for specialization, and made cities possible. Riding tracks grain and livestock. Religion sacrifices them. Warfare rides them. Trade is built on them. Once you've got large domesticated animals, everything accelerates. Populations grow, diseases evolve, technologies compound. Societies with access to those animals didn't become better, they just got a massive head start. That's why this isn't about genetics or culture, it's geography and biology. Eurasia won the livestock lottery early, and the ripple effects shaped history all the way up to modern science and global power structures. Story 15. Most mammals, even other apes, don't have births that are anywhere near as traumatic as ours. Humans are the weird ones. The theory is that once we evolved bipedalism, everything downstream got complicated. Walking upright reshaped the pelvis to be narrower and better for locomotion, while at the same time our babies' heads got bigger because brains kept scaling up. Those two trends absolutely hate each other. So childbirth turned into a biological nightmare. Tight pelvic opening, awkward angles, muscles and tissues doing jobs they weren't originally optimized for, and a baby that's basically pushing the size limit. That's why human babies are born so helpless compared to other mammals. We eject them early because keeping them in any longer would be even worse. It's a brutal trade, efficient walking and big brains in exchange for some of the most painful births in the animal kingdom, plus bipedalism, minus comfort, minus dignity. Bill Bryson talks about this in The Body, in that very, isn't this horrifying when you think about it way. He doesn't frame it as a hot take, just an unfortunate design compromise we all inherited. Story 16. Everything from gamma rays to radio waves is the same thing. Literally the same phenomenon, electromagnetic waves. The only difference is wavelength and frequency. That's it. No hard boundaries, no category switches, just the same wave, stretched or squished. Visible light isn't special except to us. It's just the tiny sliver of the spectrum our eyes evolved to detect because it was convenient under our sun. Microwaves, Wi-Fi, radar, FM radio, they're not different types of energy in some fundamental way. They're just light your eyes can't see, tuned to different sizes and uses. Gamma rays are just ultra-compressed high-energy light. Radio waves are light stretched so long you could wrap them around buildings. Your phone, your router, your car radio, and the sunlight hitting your face are all using the same underlying physics, which is kind of unsettling when you think about it. We're bathing in light constantly. We just only notice the narrow band evolution gave us. Everything else passes through us silently, invisibly, doing useful things like carrying music, maps, and cat videos. Story 17. Water boils when its vapor pressure matches the surrounding air pressure, not when it hits some magic temperature. At sea level, there's a ton of air pressing down on it, so it needs to reach 100 degrees Celsius to boil. Go higher up, there's less air pushing back. So water gives up and boils at a lower temperature. That's why at high elevations you can have water boiling like crazy, but it's actually cooler than boiling water at sea level. It didn't add less heat because water got weird, you just removed some of the pressure that was keeping it in line. This is also why cooking sucks in the mountains. Pasta takes longer, beans stay stubborn, and recipes lie to you. Your water is boiling, but it's not hot enough to cook things the same way. You're boiling food in what's basically underachieving water. Though yeah, higher elevation means lower boiling point means less heat required. Same chemistry, different atmospheric vibes. The mountain didn't change the rules, it just loosened them. Story 18. Humans are upside down. Actually, all vertebrates are too. To put it very basically, the genes which map out the general arrangement of animal body plans include those which define a dorsal and ventral surface, the topside and underside of most animals. For us bipedal humans, are front and back. For the majority of animals, these genes are the other way up. This is why insects, for example, have nerve bundles arranged along the ventral side, and the heart or major blood vessels, etc., are more dorsally arranged, completely opposite to us. Even invertebrates more closely related to us in the deuterostomia, example sea urchins, don't have our inverted gene expression. At some point in the evolution of chordates, one of our ancestors took to living upside down. I've read it suggested that this ancestor may have been a marine burrowing animal, for which orientation wouldn't have mattered much. Story 19. Humans only figured out the full DNA sequence in the late 90s, with the Human Genome Project. Massive international effort, supercomputers, billions of dollars, decades of work. We treated it like unlocking the source code of life. Meanwhile, since basically the beginning of life on Earth, tiny brainless molecules have been doing this effortlessly. Every time a cell copies its DNA, enzymes come along, read the new strand, spot errors, snip out mistakes, and fix them. No consciousness, no understanding, no blueprint on the wall, just chemistry doing quality control at insane speed and accuracy. And they don't just copy DNA once. This happens constantly, trillions of times a day across your body. If those systems weren't there, life would fall apart almost immediately from copy errors. But we're out here congratulating ourselves for finally reading DNA, while microscopic machines have been proofreading, repairing, and maintaining it flawlessly for billions of years. It's a good reminder that intelligence isn't always loud or aware. Some of the most sophisticated systems in existence don't know they're doing anything at all. Story 20. As a baby, your skull isn't one solid piece. It's made of multiple bones with gaps and connective tissue between them. That's why babies have soft spots. The bones haven't fused yet, which lets the skull flex during birth and gives the brain room to grow fast. As you age, those bones gradually fuse together. But here's the weird part. Even after fusion, the boundaries between the bones don't disappear. They're still connected by structures called sutures. They don't move, ever, but anatomically they're still joints, just completely locked ones. So your skull technically has joints, they're just immovable joints. No flex, no hinge, no sliding, purely structural seams holding everything together. It's less like Lego snapping together and more like welding pieces along visible lines. It's also why skull fractures often follow those sutures instead of cutting randomly through bone. The seams never really stop being seams. Your head isn't one bone, it's a permanent group project that hardened in place. Story 21. Evolution can happen quite quickly. Significant changes can happen over years or decades for some fast-reproducing creatures. Life is incredibly adaptive. I read somewhere that male elephants in Africa, which had very long tusks, were killed mercilessly by humans for a long period of time. What happened was elephants with smaller tusks had a much higher chance of living a long life than elephants with longer tusks. This led to elephants with smaller tusks having more offspring. This carried the trait of small tusks to next generations. And within a few centuries, now African elephants are born with small tusks, meaning when they grow up to a certain age, they are having half the length of tusks which was normal for an elephant of the same age born a few centuries ago. I don't know if this info is correct or not, but that's what I read. Story 22. Time isn't constant. It literally depends on motion. The faster you move relative to someone else, the slower time passes for you compared to them, not metaphorically. And the effect ramps up harder and harder the closer you get to the speed of light. This isn't theoretical anymore either. We can measure it. Atomic clocks flown around Earth in opposite directions come back out of sync. GPS satellites have to correct for time dilation because they're moving faster than the surface of the planet. If they didn't, your phone's location would drift by kilometers every day. What really melts brains is the aging part. If you hopped on a spacecraft going at, say, half the speed of light, you would age noticeably slower than people on Earth. Push closer to light speed and the gap gets dramatic. You come back younger. Everyone else got old. No cryosleep required, just physics. Light speed itself is the hard wall. At that speed, time basically stops from the traveler's perspective, which is wild because it means the universe treats time and space as parts of the same thing, and motion lets you trade one for the other. Story 23. In humans, and actually all deuterostomes, the first body opening that forms during development is the butt. The mouth comes later. So yeah, on a purely technical level, every one of us entered the world as a jerk first, developmentally speaking. It's just how the embryo organizes itself. One opening forms, then the rest of the body figures out what to do from there. Evolution didn't do it for the joke, but it's hard not to appreciate the timing. The nice part is the moral built into the punchline. Just because that's how you started doesn't mean that's who you're destined to be. Biology sets the opening move, not the personality. So congrats to everyone on surviving early development. And remember, nature may have made you a jerk first, but being one long-term is still a choice. Be nice. Story 24. Only about 14% of men are over 6 feet tall. That's it. Which means if height is a hard requirement, you've already eliminated roughly 86% of the male population before personality, compatibility, values, or literally anything else even enters the chat. What makes it funny is how normalized that filter is. Nobody frames it as, I'm only considering the top 1 in 7 men by a single physical trait, but that's exactly what it is. And that 14% isn't evenly distributed either. Once you factor in age, location, relationship status, and basic social compatibility, the pool shrinks fast. It doesn't mean people are wrong for having preferences. Everyone does. It just means preferences have math attached to them whether we like it or not. Narrow filters feel harmless until you realize you're shopping in a very small aisle and wondering why it's always empty. Story 25. Biology isn't some separate magic layer of reality. It's just physics and chemistry running for a very long time with feedback. Atoms follow physical laws, molecules follow chemical rules, and once you get self-replicating chemistry, evolution takes over and starts iterating like a brute force algorithm. Proteins fold because of electromagnetic forces, enzymes work because of reaction kinetics. Cells function because gradients, diffusion, and thermodynamics say they can. Even stuff that feels high level, like instincts, thoughts, or emotions, eventually bottoms out in ions moving across membranes and molecules binding where they're allowed to bind. What makes biology feel special isn't new rules. It's scale and history. Billions of years of trial and error layered on top of basic chemistry, with anything that doesn't work getting deleted. No foresight, no plan, just, does this arrangement persist or not? So life isn't physics plus something mysterious, it's physics, given time, memory, and a ruthless filter, which is kind of beautiful and kind of terrifying depending on how long you stare at it. Story 26. This one freaks people out because it pokes at a line we're very comfortable keeping blurry. The idea is that dolphins aren't just smart animals that sometimes do bad things, but creatures that seem aware enough to choose cruelty. Not hunting, not survival, not dominance in a normal animal sense, just deliberate harm. Toying with other animals, harassing them for no reason. Killing without eating, doing stuff that looks less like instinct and more like malice. What sells it is how intelligent dolphins clearly are. Self-recognition, complex communication, long memories, social rules. They understand cause and effect extremely well. So when they hurt something and keep going, it doesn't read like a reflex. It reads like they know what they're doing and choose to do it anyway. That's why people reach for the word evil, even though it's uncomfortable. We don't like attributing moral agency to animals because then we lose our clean categories. Humans are supposed to be the only ones capable of cruelty for cruelty's sake. Dolphins mess with that narrative. The unsettling takeaway isn't that dolphins are monsters. It's that once intelligence passes a certain threshold, the capacity for intentional harm might show up automatically. Not because something is broken, but because knowing you can is sometimes enough. Story 27. This one messes with people because our brains are terrible at space. The distance between the Earth and the Moon looks small in diagrams, but in reality, it's huge, about 384,000 kilometers on average. Huge enough that if you lined up all 8 planets side by side, Mercury through Neptune, they would fit comfortably between the Earth and the Moon with room left over. Not squished. Not edge cases. Clean fit. That includes Jupiter and Saturn, which are absolute units. And it still works because space is mostly empty. Like, aggressively empty. Textbooks and posters lie by necessity, because if they showed real scale, everything would just be dots separated by nothing. That's why moon missions were such a big deal. It's not just up there. It's far enough that you could stack the entire planetary lineup in the gap and still have spare distance. Once you internalize that, a lot of sci-fi travel suddenly feels way more ambitious, and a lot of space art starts looking very, very wrong. Story 28. This one is unsettling because it's probably true and way less poetic than we'd like. At the most basic level, life is just chemistry that figures out how to keep going. A self-sustaining, self-copying reaction that started billions of years ago and never stopped. No finish line, no goal, just molecules reacting in ways that happen to persist instead of fizzling out. Once replication entered the picture, evolution took over and turned that chemistry into a runaway process. Anything that made the reaction better at continuing stuck around. Anything that didn't vanish. Over time, you get cells, metabolism, ecosystems, consciousness, all stacked on top of the same original reaction. That framing strips away a lot of mysticism, but it also explains why life is so relentless, why it fills every niche, why it's hard to kill off completely. It's not trying to survive in a moral sense. It's just obeying thermodynamics and feedback loops. You, me, trees, bacteria, whales, we're all just extremely elaborate intermediates in a reaction chain that started when the conditions were right and never found a reason to stop. Meaning doesn't disappear. It just becomes something we add on top of the chemistry ourselves. Story 29. Sounds like sci-fi, but it's rooted just enough in real research to feel dangerous. The idea is that certain carbon nanotube and nanostructured surfaces can be made so smooth and energetically hostile that bacteria literally can't get a grip. Not they die, not they're repelled, but they just can't stick. No foothold, no adhesion, no biofilm, germs bounce. So in theory, you could make things like surgical gloves, tools, or even an operating table that never actually needs sanitizing because there's nothing for microbes to latch onto in the first place. No pores, no texture at the scale bacteria live at. It's like trying to climb a wall made of perfectly polished ice with suction cups that don't work. What makes it believable is that we already do this accidentally. Shark skin textures reduce bacterial growth. Certain insect wings physically shred microbes. Nanotech just takes that idea and min-maxes it. The catch, of course, is cost, durability, and scale. Making lab samples is easy. Making a hospital full of them without degradation is hard, but the concept alone is wild. Hygiene not by killing germs, but by denying them physics. The future of cleanliness might not be bleach. It might just be surfaces that say nope. Story 30. Gas in our houses doesn't have a smell. It is synthetically added so we can smell leaks. Additionally, each country or region adds a different smell, so what each person thinks of as the smell of gas is different. Another addition, California makes their gas smell of rotten meat, so that vultures circle leaks in the large pipelines through open deserts, making them easy to find. Story 31. The story goes that a linguist analyzed the frequency of letters in Ulysses and found something weirdly clean. When you rank letters by how often they appear, the plot forms a straight line on a log scale, basically a mathematical signature of structured language. The same pattern shows up in other human languages too, regardless of alphabet or culture. Then things get interesting. When researchers applied the same analysis to baby babble, the pattern completely vanished. No structure, just noise. Which makes sense, babies aren't speaking a language yet, they're experimenting with sounds. But they tried it on dolphin clicks, and the pattern came back. Not random, not chaotic, the same statistical structure seen in human language. Even more unsettling, dolphin calves' clicks don't follow the pattern either, implying dolphins have a learned language, not just instinctive sounds. They babble, then acquire structure over time, just like us. The implication isn't that dolphins are speaking English underwater. It's that whatever language is, dolphins seem to be doing the same thing at a complexity level comparable to humans. Which means the hard part may not be intelligence, it may just be cracking the code. Story 32. Many astronauts who go to space and see Earth from space have a shift in awareness. They really begin to see humans as all being one united species that should not be fighting wars or competing for resources. They see all of Earth and think we need to get along with each other and also preserve the Earth. Astronauts also report feeling incredibly small and fragile. They see Earth and life as fragile and precious. Back when human space travel was still new, it was customary in Russia to send war veterans, particularly old flight pilots, into space. One incredibly well-respected veteran who was known for his total support and patriotism of Russia came back telling everyone to stop fighting. His views totally switched. At the time, Russian astronauts never took a second flight into space, but they asked him to. His ship blew up. Most people think the Russian government blew up his ship on purpose to talk about world peace and the horrors of war. Story 33. The vast majority of drugs are still absolutely fine after their use by date. Of course, this can vary widely based on the specific drug, so do some research and make sure that it is still safe to use after expiration. However, the majority of drugs only experience a very minimal reduction in potency over time. Most drugs will still be over 90% effective, even if expired by a couple of years. Most of the time, pharmaceutical companies have to put shortened expiry dates on products because they cannot guarantee that they will deliver the exact correct dose after a few years. Also, they often do still deliver an acceptable dose, but the pharmaceutical company doesn't have all of the evidence to support an expiration extension claim, or the product may fail under worst-case storage conditions. Stored in a 40 °C storage chamber for years. A lot of people waste good drugs by throwing them out unnecessarily just because they're a few months out of date. Ray 34. Yeah, people usually stop at time slows down and miss the other two rules that make relativity actually unsettling. The first one everyone hears is time dilation. Move fast enough and time literally runs slower for you compared to someone standing still. That alone is already rude to common sense. The second rule is weirder. The faster you go, the shorter distances become in the direction you're traveling. Space itself squishes. From your perspective, the universe gets smaller the faster you move. That's why near light-speed travel doesn't feel like crossing absurd distances to the traveler. The distance itself collapses. You don't outrun space, space gives up. The third rule is the real brain melter. Simultaneity isn't universal. Events that happen at the same time for one observer don't have to happen at the same time for another. If I'm standing still and snap both fingers at once, someone zooming past at relativistic speed will measure those snaps as happening at different times. There's no who's right. Both observations are equally valid. So time slows, space shrinks, and now stops being a shared concept. Relativity doesn't say reality is weird sometimes. It says reality is always weird, we just move too slowly to notice. Story 35. This is one of those perspective nukes that makes both space and your own body feel unreal. On the macro side, the universe is stupidly big. Estimates say there are something like 10,000 stars for every single grain of sand on Earth's surface. Not beaches, not deserts, all the sand. It's the stat people use to convey your brain is not built for this scale, and it works. But then the micro side flips the table. There are more atoms in a single human eyeball than there are stars in the entire observable universe. One eyeball, not your whole body, not your brain. Just the squishy camera you use to read this sentence. We're really good at being impressed by vast distances and giant numbers spread out across space. Galaxies, nebulae, light years. But we massively underestimate how much stuff is packed into small volumes. Matter is insanely dense in terms of count, even when it feels light and empty to us. So yeah, the universe is incomprehensibly large, but it's also incomprehensibly packed at small scales. We're not tiny specks floating in nothing. We're absurdly complex piles of matter temporarily arranged in a way that can think about both extremes. Big isn't the only thing that's overwhelming. Small is doing just as much heavy lifting.